Okay, welcome to the Vortex Energy Podcast. We are so pleased to have Kellan Flukiger here, and Sue, Grandmother Sue, and Tazzy Sue is on with us as well. And Kellan, I've known Kellan for, it's got to be over 5 years now. Just after I'd moved here to Tazzy, Kellan's been a mentor and a friend. He's the ultimate catalyst and coach, speaker, author, performer, mentor, husband, father, and friend. He's the CEO, founder at Kellan Flukiger Personal Achievement, lives in Edmonton, Alberta, originally from San Francisco, California, and he's married to Joy Flukiger. One of the reasons I've known Kellan as a business coach and for many years, and the reason we brought him on the Vortex Energy Podcast today is because of an amazing new book that he has out called Meeting God at the Door. And this is one of those books that I think could truly be an epic landmark book for a lot of people looking for what is the spiritual connection in their own life, as seen how Kellan came face to face with God during a comatose experience. But I'm going to let Kellan dive right into that, about the inspiration behind Meeting God at the Door.
Thank you. So having a near-death experience is not one of those things you either expect or plan for. I had heard, when I was a kid, I heard a story about a guy in a rural town where my mother grew up, who was the town rowdy, kind of drunk and whatever, and had stuff, that anyway, had a bad reputation. And so then there was this rumor that went around that he died, only not really. And that he came back and all that stuff. And all I knew as a kid, I was 10 or 11 years old at the time, was that after that, he was a completely different person, and he was done being rowdy and nice to everybody and whatever. And so that was my introduction to the notion of going to the other side or seeing the other side or any of that kind of stuff. As a kid, I really don't remember. I'm 8 or 9 or 10, somewhere in that range. And my thing keeps beeping and I don't know how to turn it off. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I never thought about it for myself. And in last summer, Joy and I went on a cruise, and I got sick at the end of the cruise, and it just kept getting really, really worse, like the last 2 days. So we flew home. My health went precipitously downhill. And by Friday, June, I think, 8th or something, 5th, 8th, I don't know. Friday, June this last year, I decided I really needed to go to the hospital. So I did. And I don't know if it was what I looked like or whatever, but usually go to an emergency room and it's 3 hours of wait. And in this particular case, in 10 minutes, I was in a private room and the doctor came in to see me and like the whole thing. And I started going, this is weird. And I was immediately admitted to the hospital, or they said they were going to. The doctor came in and said, well, at the minimum, you have pneumonia in both lungs, and we're sure there's something else going on here, et cetera, et cetera. So that took most of the afternoon. They were looking for a place for me, actually, not to that I was going to come in or not. So anyway, finally that evening, Joy had gone home because we weren't sure how long I was just going to be sitting there. And the doctor came in and said to me something that you never expect to hear. He looked at me and he said, yeah, there's definitely something wrong. We're probably going to put you in intensive care, and said something about isolation. And then he asked me this question: do we have permission to intubate and do anything that we need to preserve your life? And I looked at him. I said,
that's not a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, but inside I'm like, okay, this is like sort of off the cliff here. Sure, whatever, right? And it turns out, so then I started meditating, and the first 5 books I wrote were on meditation, and I've been a practitioner since I was 17, along with martial arts and second-degree black belt, a couple styles, none of that matters. But so I went inside to start meditation and see what was going on, and I could definitely feel the beginning of separation between body and spirit. So I sent Joy a cryptic text at 10:30 or 11 at night, and it had 3 lines. First line said, ICU. The second line said, isolation/intubation. And the third line said, I may be dying. And she didn't get it. She'd already gone to sleep. So about 2 hours later, the nurse called the house, and Joy got the phone call you never want to get, because the lady on the phone said, are you coming?
Oh, jeez.
And she said,
At 2 o'clock in the morning.
What? 2 o'clock in the morning. And then she saw my text, and it was like hyperventilation. Holy crap, right? The whole thing. And by then I had already crashed. I mean, we're talking crash cart, crash, code blue, pink, orange, red, black, depends on the hospital. So I was gone. I was in a coma. Joy said, do I need to come right now? And the nurse said, well, there's not anything you can do right now. He's already in isolation. And I was not only in the ICU, but I was in the biohazard containment part, double doors, airlock, glove, mask up, negative pressure, the whole thing, like a Stephen King movie about a disease.
Yeah.
So I was in one of those chambers. And that's where it started. I was in a coma for about 2 weeks. And for the first 4 or 5 days, it was completely unknown if I was going to live or die. It turns out that finally by Monday night, they figured out what I had. And the prognosis for what I had is it has a 10-day kill rate of 100% if you're not in the hospital. And if you are in the hospital, it drops to 60%. Well, I had gotten to the hospital at the end of day 5. Yeah. So it was pretty scary at that point. And for the first 4 or 5 days, what was going to happen was unknown. I was at or by a thread. So what happened inside and outside was completely different. Of course, I was unconscious, and Joy described to me later the frantic stuff that you'd see in a movie, infectious disease team running around doing stuff in all these rooms. Of course, I'm gone somewhere. And this is where my experience started. So in the book, Meeting God at the Door, I wrote both sets. One set of what was going on from outside that Joy described, and then what I experienced. And what I experienced was quite simple. I regained consciousness in my mind. I was in a gray, sort of nondescript place. I was horizontal, which was equals to where my body was, but I could see just a little ways off a doorway. And the doorway was very, very bright, although the light was not streaming through. It was just extremely bright on the other side. And I had a feeling I wanted to be at the doorway. So I suddenly was, and I was sort of casually propped just slightly. It wasn't like leaning, but slightly propped against the door jamb. And I looked across into the white, and you know where you are. So I looked at that doorway and I thought, okay, I know where we are. And then there was someone on the other side, precisely on the other side of the door. And I didn't feel any particular urge to step across. I knew what the doorway was, and I knew what would happen if I did. And so we stood there for a moment. And then there were 3 conversations. And the first conversation was a single question. And the single question was, do you want to come home? And I felt like, started, hyperventilating conceptually, right? Thinking, okay, do I want to come home? And all of the stuff that goes on in your mind. I got stuff I've committed to do. I've got clients. I've got joy. I'm really enjoying life. What's going on? I've got, so we had a long discussion about all the reasons to go and not to go and everything like that. And it was a full ranging discussion. Finally, when I got done, I said, no, I think I'd like to stay. And that conversation was over. And the next day, and I have no idea how I knew it was the next day or how I knew anything, but it was. So the next day there, I'm back at the doorway having another conversation. And it was interesting because I noticed 2 really fascinating things. Number one, the topic of the previous day, going or staying, wasn't even raised. So that decision had been made, that was done. So today, what we're talking about is, okay, you decided to stay, and here's all the things you said. What are you going to do? And so then we launched into a discussion about what the truths was that I was perceiving. And I don't know if you or any of your listeners have seen that movie with Jodie Foster in it, where she goes through this space thing, and she disappears for 12 minutes, and the video camera goes blank, and she's in outer space. Okay, so you've seen that.
Okay, yeah.
The whole experience was kind of like, it felt like that the whole time. But so anyway, we talked about people and opportunity and who we are and all this stuff, and 4 principles became really clear. The first principle was we're divinely created. So we're intentional divine creations, period. The second thing is that each of us had assignments or opportunities, assignments that we agreed to joyfully and were excited about to do. In other words, we came here not just for casual reference, but with something to do that was important and that we were excited about. And the third part was that we had as gifts, the gifts and talents that we need to accomplish those things. And the fourth thing was that all the help that we possibly need to do those is available. So it was a much longer conversation, but that's a condensation of the 4 key points that came out of this. And so I said, okay, since that's true, why do we settle for crumbs?
Yeah.
And I mean, that was the question. I said, okay, why do we settle for crumbs? And I don't know if it's something in the economy of heavenly communication, but the answers always seem to be really short, right? Textured and rich, but short. And the answer was because you don't believe. And I thought, it wasn't answered in the context of dogma or religion, but it was in the context clearly of, I just told you what's going on, and you collectively don't believe. And consequently, you don't do what you could do. And so we had some more conversation about that. And in that conversation came the second of the 2 books, which I wrote this summer, was the contents of that second conversation, which is called the Book of Context.
And there'll be a link down below to both of these books. They're both astounding books. I think I would start with the first, Meeting God at the Door, and then do the second book in that order, unless you have a different recommendation, Kellan.
No, not at all. The Meeting God at the Door is a description of everything that happened before, what happened, the fulsome description of these conversations, which I'm summarizing right now, and then what happened when I came out of the coma and got out of the hospital. And the exit from the hospital was another astounding miracle that was created from the principles of the Book of Context. And it was funny, after I wrote the Book of Context, I sent it to a friend who is also a well-published, well-respected author. Barbara, you might know him, Dr. Mort Orman, who's written the books on stress and all that stuff, and he's well-respected. Anyway, he wrote it, he read it, and he loved it, and he wrote a foreword, and et cetera, et cetera. And he said to me, I love the book and everything else, but he said the name, like it's like too weird. If you wrote the Book of Love, okay, we know what that is. If you wrote the Book of Joy, like we know what that is. But the Book of Context? Are you kidding? And so, we had a conversation a little bit back and forth about it. And I said, Mort, the name is not negotiable.
I will tell you, it confused me as well. I was like, what is he talking about now? I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
I get it. But yeah, the context is the collection of beliefs and boundaries that we live in. So it is our context. But the name isn't negotiable because that was the name of the book. So, okay. So that's the book that I wrote about it, which was the contents of the answer to the question, why do we settle for crumbs and what should we do about that? Because when the 4 truths of we're divine, we have a mission, we have gifts and talents, and we have all the help, then of course my automatic question, thought, having decided to stay, is okay, what am I doing and how do I do it? And how do I do it perfectly as best I can, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that was the framework of that, which is to help people, which was what I had already committed to do in coaching, help people do things they don't believe they can do. now on steroids with the concepts and experience that I've had. So when we got done with that conversation, I was really excited. I was literally vibrating on my side of the door, just really excited. But then the conversation got over. And then the next day, the third day, there was a conversation that was just one question again. And so there I am at the door on the third day. And the question was, are you sure?
Mm.
And I had another heart attack standing there like, what do you mean, am I sure? Did I miss something here? Like, am I biting off more than I can chew? Am I an idiot? Like, what? And so it was a conversation about every different way that I could think about that question. And finally I answered, yeah, I'm sure. And that third conversation ended with a finality. Nothing was said, but you knew we were done. Okay, we're done. Right. And so it was over, and I woke up, I don't know however many days later. And the funny part was I woke up just blubbering to the nurses and stuff about the book of context and, stuff like that. And I thought, I was also, and then I started hallucinating and seeing wires going out of the ceiling and all kinds of crazy stuff that happens when you come out of a coma. It's PTSD and whatever. So I thought, okay, I'm sure they think I'm crazy. And that's okay. I don't really care because I know what happened. And a week later, when I got out of the ICU and was sent up to the floor, the head of the infectious disease team that had worked on saving my body came in to bid me goodbye, and it was a joke, thanks. I hope I never see you again. If I never see you again too, that kind of thing. And then when I got ready to leave, he turned toward me in a very serious way. He said, "But I need you to come back and tell me what you saw." So whatever it is that I slobbered out of myself to the nurses, I didn't even saw him in the room. Yeah. It was like he was serious. So we're getting a second printing of the books done, and then we have an appointment to go back and see that doctor. And there's been a couple of other medical folks that are interested as well, who were part of the whole thing that we get to go see and explain what happened. Yeah. So that's the story of the books. Meeting God at the Door, choice or conversations, choices, and commitments of a near-death experience is the first one. The Book of Context is the second one. I wrote them both within 6 weeks after getting out of the hospital, and that's the story.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just an amazing story, and I'm really glad that you were able to have the frame of mind to get it all out while it was still very fresh in your memory. But what changes have you seen since you've come out of the coma and talking about this story and writing the book? How has it changed what you do on a day-to-day basis?
So in the month of October, I didn't go anywhere for July or August or September. I was in recovery mode. My lungs were trashed because of the necrotizing MRSA. I'd done a number of my lungs. I lost a bunch of capacity and lost 35 pounds in the hospital in that month.
Yeah, you're looking better now. It looks like you put on some weight finally, a little bit of weight.
I have. I looked like an extra, in a concentration camp movie. My mother-in-law was like, "Oh man," so I have put on a few pounds intentionally. So anyway, when I went to speak at different things in October, somebody asked me that at the Q&A. So what's the big difference for you after this? And I hadn't thought about the question that way. And the thing that came out of me instantly, without even thought, is I no longer experience fear. So that's simply something I don't feel. The emotion of fear, I don't feel that anymore. And it was remarkable. Number one, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but that was an immediate awareness and answer. And the second thing that is different that's big and noticeable was every time I talk to someone, when I meet them and see them, I see them in their context.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is it's like the bodysuit that they're wearing, straight jacket or whatever. And I don't mean that as weird as it sounds, but that's just how they present. And the context or limitations present as transparent and flexible. So that's how I see everybody that I talk to. And so when we talk about those things, it isn't from a place of, I hope, it's just how what I see.
Yeah.
In
So do you
them.
think that's changed your interactions with your clients, for example, how you deal with your clients?
Absolutely. It's changed my interaction. I've had people tell me, a marked difference. You were compelling and powerful before, but there's just something, that sort of language, something different, something. And I'm laughing a little bit, not because it's funny, but it sounds funny to describe it, but it has been articulated in very powerful terms by some folks that I'd met and talked to who knew me before and after. And so, yes, there is. And yes, it's significant. And yes, it matters.
Yeah. So, Sue, you've read the book as well, Meeting God at the Door. What questions do you have for Kellan?
Not so much questions. I'd like to sort of go a little bit more into the actual feeling of God, what you felt when you were standing there. I know it's sort of, you were completely overawed, and I know if it was me, I'd have a billion questions and everything else, but I can understand too that when you meet something like that, you just are, and you just absorb.
I can tell you something.
Could you sort of expand on the feeling that you had?
Yes. And one of the most notable things is the absence of something. And the thing that was absent is when I imagined before heaven or God or meeting, the Almighty, the perfect thing, it was accompanied with, am I good enough? I mean, I suffered with decades of depression and not good enough and the whole thing. And I realized afterwards that at no time in any of the interaction or any of the conversation was there the tiniest hint of fear. Oh no, I'm not ready. I'm not okay. Like there was a complete and noticeable, monstrous absence of that. All of the things that you think of, that you might think of, especially if you have sometimes, like I had for decades, internalized the idea that I'm not good enough, that I suck or whatever. The complete absence of that was remarkable. And another thing was the complete intensity of focus and conversation. Like at no point did I have the sense that God had something else to do right then.
He wasn't checking his email or checking his text messages.
It was just like this was the only thing happening in the universe. So there was no hint of intimidation or fear or worry or anything. There was an absolute purity of conversation, of intent, of focus. And it was all done in the most, the word soft comes to mind, but it wasn't soft. It was extremely intense.
Yes, but you would have had to have been in your purest self to actually be there.
Obviously, something happened. Okay, but I just felt like nothing afraid of or anything, which I always imagined I would. Like, should I hide under the bushes or something? And or should I hide behind the door? Well, except there wasn't a door; it was just a doorway, right? It wasn't like I wasn't aware of a door per se that one would have opened or closed, but it was a doorway with door jambs. So anyway, those were two things: absolute attention, absolute focus, a gentleness. There was I would say, an absolute overwhelming sense of love, but not in the sense, and I say but advisedly, not in the sense of mushy, but in the sense of diamond clear purity.
Mm.
That you know, you can't, we don't have the language to describe the intensity or the purity or the directness or the connectedness. You know, there was total singularity of being in that time of communication. And sometimes I thought I was hearing the questions in the conversation, and sometimes I felt like they were, you know, mind meld, if you will, like sort of experiencing them. But sometimes it felt very much like an audible conversation.
Mm.
And so like we were talking. And other times it felt like some of it was just communication without words or audible sound.
Mm.
And the other thing that was interesting is the hospital stay wasn't very much fun. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of fear associated with after I woke up. There were lots of hallucinations. There was a lot of feeling of PTSD, of blackness, of paranoia. Sometimes I thought I heard people whispering in the hallway, and conspiracies and all kinds of craziness that I wrote about in the book. Scary, ugly, black, terrifying things. And those experiences were so completely, profoundly the opposite. It was like an island of complete brilliance of light in contrast with this ugly of the hallucinations. And I understand that all of that's normal, you know, with respect to a coma and being under for a long time and coming out of it and PTSD. And all I saw cameras and wires growing out of the ceiling and spying on me and just all kinds of crazy hallucinations. And I thought they were conspiring to, you know, take over my life. And there was, I woke up one night and then thought that they were doing construction outside, and I was in a private room because of isolation. And then I thought there was a new door that they built into the bathroom that was part of my room. And so there was a light on in the bathroom, and I thought somebody was in there that had come in from the outside door. So I went and knocked on the door that went out to the nurse's station, and the doctor came and opened it. And I said, "Can I use the bathroom? Looks like somebody's in there." Because I thought they put another door in, right? And he said, "No, the light's on so you can find it." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." You know, I mean, that crazy, funny, laughable, except it wasn't funny at the time. It was terrifying and frightening. And it's funny, it is funny now, but it wasn't funny then. And, you know, Joy, I told her, you know, this is going on, and go home and turn all the computers off. They're spying on us, and just all kinds of crazy stuff, except this.
Yeah.
You know,
So
coherent, clear.
was it always clear to you, that distinction between what you experienced when you were in the coma and the conversations with God and what happened when you came out of the coma? Was it always that clear distinction? This one's real, even though I was in a coma, and this stuff.
I knew that the hallucinations were real and terrifying, and Joy was trying to help me understand that the clock wasn't running backwards and the clock face wasn't melting, and, you know, they weren't conspiring to starve me to death, even though I'd lost 1 million pounds, and she was pounding on them to give me more feeding, and they had to put the feeding tube in my stomach 5 times because it kept malfunctioning. And I don't know if you've had that done before, but oh my word, I never want to do that again.
Yeah.
And after the first time, then it didn't work. It's like, can I just die of starvation? Please don't cram another one of those up my nose and down my throat. You know, only they did it again. And for some reason it kept failing after a day or two, you know, so 5 of them, right? And it's like, you know, so there was this horrifying set of experiences made worse by the fact that I was, you know, the shape of the room kept changing. And one time I thought I was outside freezing to death, and I was absolutely convinced I was naked in the snow, and the nurse that was taking care of me had gone off and left me there, and he was making oatmeal in the other room, and it was just,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And I was going to be drugged forever, and they were conspiring. It's nuts. And I knew at one time, on one level it was nuts, but on the other level I was terrified because this was real for me, this conspiracy and all this stuff. But it in no way it was anything like the other. That was just, that experience was where it was, and all the rest of this was this wad of craziness.
So is the experience as intense for you emotionally and spiritually now, a few months on, as it was, when you first came back into consciousness out of the coma?
When I talk about it
deeply, yeah,
or I reflect on it, absolutely. It's as clear as anything. It affects me physically. My body trembles. The physical container of the infinite spirit is affected by the power of it. It does not fade at all. No.
Nice.
How great was the pull to go through that door?
A lot and not at all. I had a tremendous curiosity, and there was that was another thing. Thank you for asking that. I felt absolutely no expectation to go or not go.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was completely, and he participated fully in my conversation, mostly with myself, only about whether to go or stay, and what I was going to do and stay, and all of it, like total connectedness and interest, like I said before. But I didn't feel the slightest should at all. And so it was scary on the one hand, not because it's scary, but because you don't know exactly what that is. But I knew what I was leaving. And it wasn't that I was afraid to leave. The pull to stay was unfinished. I have so much that I've already committed to do. And now that I know this, how can I possibly not stay here and finish this stuff? Like, part of it was like, you got to be kidding. We're just getting organized. It's about part of it. Felt.
Nice.
And spiritual bucket list was unfinished.
Yeah, I wasn't being funny then. It was very, very holy. It was just absolute diamond clear clarity, purity, holiness, power, awesomeness, all those things that it ought to be. It was. It was all the way, straight up, 100%, no anything. Overwhelming. I felt protected and overwhelmed at the same time. I felt like obviously I was in some sort of protected way to even be in such a place or to stand like that. And there's a couple things that I didn't, won't, write in the book just because of their sacred nature. But yeah. It's just one of those things you can't describe.
Yeah, I think probably the greatest gift that I can see coming out of this is, as you're talking to people and relating your experience, they're actually seeing the complete and utter integrity, and it's got to help their belief and their growth and everything, because they can see that it's actually happened through you.
One of the things that I always say to clients when they're talking about either their purpose, their mission, or their marketing, either one, is that truth carries its own power. And so our frantic effort to describe something in a powerful way pales in comparison to the purity and power of truth.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So have you seen an effect on the people around you directly? Have they been impacted by the understanding or their understanding of your experience?
some, I've certainly seen that, and it typically is correlated to those who see the difference. In other words, our ability, it goes back to the book of context. Why do we settle for crumbs? Because you don't believe. So the order of our interaction with divinity seems to be directly correlated to our level of openness and willingness. There seems to be an unwritten law, or maybe written, that there will be no infringement of agency or the right to choose. And so someone who is open and seeking is impacted, and someone who has elected to be not so, that choice is respected to the utmost all the time.
Yeah, that's
Which makes
pretty
sense
amazing.
in terms of should I stay or should I go? There was no hint. It was pure choice. And each choice would have consequences. If you do this, this happens. If you do this, this happens, just like here. But that willingness to choose. So people that are impacted are people that are looking to be impacted. People that are open and seeking. And when I talk about coaching, people that say, how do you find clients or whatever, the answer is really simple. People that are, my 3 words are hurting, looking, willing. And hurting is a broad term, not necessarily in pain, but something's not like they want it. So hurting, looking and willing, looking for a solution, looking for an answer, looking for a change, and willing to do the personal development push-ups. I call them PD push-ups. Willing to do whatever that is it's required to make stuff happen.
So Kellan, your message really is so powerful. What's the best way for people to reach you?
The easiest way for people who want to have a direct conversation is just send me an email. My email is Coach Kellan Flukiger, and the podcast will spell the name right, so I'm not going to spell it right now. It's long and complicated, and don't put an N in the last name. Coach Kellan Flukiger at gmail.com. The easiest way to connect with me and see what I'm about and what I'm doing is to friend me on Facebook and then stalk my Facebook wall. Because I live out loud on Facebook. I put Facebook Lives up every day or every other day. And I talk about coaching, and I talk about accomplishment and achievement and our callings and purpose and what's going on in life, walk of life videos. And people do that, and then they send me messages if they want to talk. I'm open to conversation. That way, those are the 2 easiest ways. Send me an email or friend me on Facebook and stalk my Facebook wall.
We're up to the easy part, Kellan. So can you finish these sentences? The world needs
to be completely accepting of the truth that they're a divine creation and they have a purpose. They need to know that and live in connection with that truth. Not maybe, not wonder if, not sort of. It is a truth. To the extent we live and accept that, it changes everything we do and how we think.
Yeah, excellent. How about I believe in?
The intention of our Creator to help us be as great as we are willing to be. I am absolutely certain of that.
Nice. Love is
the mother of time and the motivating force behind all growth.
I would like to thank
you for letting me be part of this group and to answer these questions. I think I didn't say a lot about Joy, my wife. Her behavior and actions and steadfastness during this time was nothing short of heroic and movie worthy. And I can't describe it without breaking down right now, so I'm not going to. If you want to read about it in the book, she was impossible, impossibly powerful and good.
Love is.
I
Is that all
want
the
my,
questions?
yeah, one more. I want my legacy to be.
Oh, I want my legacy to be that I helped as many people as I could touch, understand, discover, develop, and deliver. Discover, develop, and manifest their divine nature and gifts, and understand that we are the most we can be when we are ultimately and absolutely in the service of our fellow creatures, period.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Kellan. It's an incredibly moving book, and the second book, the Book of Context, is also a very, very powerful book that details all of Kellan's story, dramatic story, and impactful story. I highly, highly recommend that you click on the links below to click through to Amazon and get your copies of the book, because truly something that everybody needs to read to understand what's going on in your own life, and how do you take this wisdom that's come from a very wise man, Kellan, but who had a very special opportunity to crystallize these emotions and this power into words. So I really thank you, Kellan, for all of your dedication over the many years to things you've done.
Absolutely.
Any last words you'd like to add for our audience?
There is, and this is almost funny, and that is, after I get out of the hospital in July, I was completely physically flatlined. Are you up against a hard deadline? Can I have another
No,
couple
we're
of minutes?
good. We're good. Yeah.
All right. So I was flatlined physically. As I mentioned earlier, I have a couple black belts in martial arts, and there's never been a time in my life when I couldn't hit the floor and do 40 push-ups. When I got home from the hospital, I got on the floor then a couple of days later, and I couldn't get my nose out of the carpet. So we're talking zero. So I was completely physically flatlined, like nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, crap. I got to rebuild my whole life. And there was a whole a spiritual experience around that, and conversations in prayer and meditation about that. And that's in the book. So in November, so I got out in July, so August, September, October, November, about 4 months. And I was gradually building up lungs and being able to do something. And I got all the way back up to 45 push-ups, by the way, in that time. So for whatever that's worth, right? For some reason, that was the measure of something. And at the end of November, my back hurt. I had back pain, and I thought, okay, it's back pain. What's going on? And I'd been out walking in the snowy ravine, and I'd fallen down a couple of days earlier, and I thought maybe I tweaked my back or whatever. A week later, 5th of December, I got up in the morning of the 5th of December, and I couldn't move. I got out of bed and fell on the floor, collapsed, and I thought, this is not good. So then I tried to get up on my hands and knees and crawl to the bathroom, and I collapsed again. And so this short story, I'll make it short, but it turned out I had to go to the hospital in the ambulance, and because I couldn't move. And it turned out that I needed emergency surgery on my spine. And so I had a long incision on the top of my spine from my neck on down to drain an abscess. And it was a leftover piece of this bacteria. And so someone asked me, and it was amazing. There's a whole story around that, which I won't tell, about things that happened. But the reason I'm telling this part is because it's funny. Do I have a last word? Yeah. The last word is, someone asked me when that happened, so are you going to write another book? And I said, I don't write books about having operations. Nobody wants to read about some old man having operations. Like, who cares, right? And then some other things happened in that space. So I spent another 10 days in the hospital in December. The surgeon who operated on me in the middle of the night, I mean, I was at the emergency room. They sent me direct to the operating room. Emergency, this, that, and the other seems to be the story of my life, although I've never been a hospital bunny for the rest of my life, right? More time in the hospital last than the rest of my life put together. And then I realized, he said to me when he took the ropes that they called stitches out of my back, I looked like a stegosaurus for a while. He said, I can count on less than one hand the number of people that have come into the hospital like you did, completely immobile and on a stretcher, and then have walked out of this building. So then what I realized is that there was another book, and the book is the second volume of the Book of Context, and it will be written in April, and it will be published in May, and the name of that book is Walking Without Fear. And it is the sequel contextually and what happened. And there's a whole spiritual connection between the two events, which we don't have time to explore now. But Walking Without Fear is the sequel.
That's a
to
great
that book,
title.
which-
That's a great title, and that's a great. It's a very moving story. Your personal ability to recount everything that's happening, and it's. I think people underestimate how our spiritual growth impacts our daily life. You know, people think of it as something separate from all the personal and other business goals we have, and to me, it's something that's so directly entwined with everything we do and everything we are, the spiritual side of ourselves. And most people push that aside, or look at it only on Sunday if they go to mass or go to church. And it's part of who we are every single day.
Yeah, I would go all the way to say it's the foundation.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of who we are, and all the rest of stuff's just stuff on top.
Good stuff. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Yeah. So really looking forward to seeing your new book. And Kellan's going to be in Australia in March. He's coming in here next month. So maybe we'll be seeing some more things things going on here.
Thank you very much for having me, both, Barbara and
much.
Sue. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So
Thank you
reach
so
out
much.
to Kellan at Coach Kellan Flukiger at gmail.com, or find him on Facebook, and you'll have the links below to his latest 2 books, and you can see all his other books on Amazon, and dive in deep, because believe me, this is someone you want to know and you want to get to know even better. So thank you, Kellan. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thrilled to be here and grateful for technology that brings us together across 200 million light years.
That's right. All right. Have a great one.